Reason for the advanced class is several reasons, and I explained this in the basic class, but let me explain that permanent cosmetics, learning permanent cosmetics is a process. Permanent cosmetic procedures are art. They truly are art. The longer I'm in this business, the more I appreciate that these procedures are art. One of the prettiest tattoos I've ever seen was performed in a prison with a needle and burnt suit from a Bible. And it was absolutely exquisite. I've seen a couple of those cases. And while some people can make judgment on where it was performed at in terms of a lack of sterilization and sanitation, possibly there wasn't any sanitation or sterilization in that particular setting. But the point is, this person found a way to create a beautiful piece of artwork with a needle and burnt suit from a Bible. And the reason that had such a profound effect on me is because it really drove home the fact that these procedures are art. Again, there's no right way or wrong way to do these procedures. It's about finding what works for you. It's about developing a relationship between what you think is pretty, what you don't think is pretty, what you don't like, how heavy-handed you are, how much pressure you apply, how you stretch, if you're stretching properly, improperly, those sorts of things. The tools that you work with, the pigments, all of those things go into play when it comes to doing permanent cosmetics. And everybody has an individual style. In my particular area, a lot of times I know who did the permanent makeup simply because I recognize the art. These procedures truly are art. And again, not everybody does the same thing, and not, you know, just because something works for one person doesn't mean it works for another, okay? And learning these procedures is such a process. The machines that I use today are not the machines that I started out with, or the machines that I would have recommended several years ago. The needles that I use today may vary differently from the needles that I used previously. So it really is a process. And when we teach permanent cosmetics to most people, generally they come to our basic course of instruction, and then they move into the hands-on portion of the class, and then usually get a little bit more hands-on before they come to the advanced class. Hopefully you've had enough hands-on that you come with a lot of questions. I always like when people come with questions because I know that they're really heavy in that learning process of permanent makeup. I've been doing these procedures since 1987. I am recognized in our industry as pioneering much of permanent cosmetic pigments. And I've done thousands and thousands of procedures, and I can tell you that I'm still really growing, and I've probably seen more growth in my personal permanent cosmetic procedures in the last 5 years than I did all those years before that, because I really got the concepts that I'm teaching in this class. The most valuable lecture that I'm going to be teaching you is the first lecture called Variables That Affect Color. What happens to technicians is they get out there, they get the basics, they get the concepts, and then they go out and they start doing procedures, and a lot of times they're experiencing touch-up procedures. Or maybe the colors aren't coming out the way you wanted them to. My goal for you is to hopefully teach you the tools so that you can have control over your procedures, so that you don't feel so what should I say, influenced by, you know, what the body's going to do with this color. So you have more control what your final result is going to look like. A good technician is not a technician who produces a really pretty immediately after result. A good technician is a technician who creates a final result that 6 weeks after the procedure it looks really pretty. So my goal for you is to teach you how to do permanent cosmetics so that you don't have to do a lot of touch-up applications, and so that 6 weeks after you do your permanent cosmetic procedure, you get a final result that you intended to achieve. There are many, many variables that affect color, and I'm going to go into that in this first presentation. See, to jump all over the map anyway, I'm attention deficit disorder, so I kind of am a little chaotic in my own lecture. So I always ask my students who I am teaching to or lecturing to please help me stay on track. And how you can do that is try not to ask me questions about lips if I'm talking about brows or, you know, subjects. Try to keep your questions to the subject at hand. If you have questions in your mind that come up, please feel free, write them down and ask them when we reach that particular topic. Because there is a limited amount of time in this class, we cannot make promises to how many procedures we can do in the class. It is impossible to gauge exactly how many procedures we can perform. This class is designed to teach you how to do procedures, not for everyone to get all of their permanent makeup done. I realize that a lot of you like to go home with a procedure, and I highly recommend that. Your face is a billboard for permanent makeup. People buy what I wear on my face. They request what I wear on my face. I probably sell more mucosal eyeliners than anyone in our industry simply because I wear mucosal tissue eyeliner. I sell tons of accent colors because I believe in it and because I have accent colors on my eyes. So people buy what you have on your face. You know, you need to get your procedures done, but just know that we can only do so many procedures in this class. And even if you're promised a procedure, if time or circumstances does not allow it, you will not get the procedure done. So just know that. Also, the other thing is we have a zero tolerance policy for cross-contamination in this class. You should, at this point, know what cross-contamination is. If you don't, ask your instructor when you're getting ready to do hands-on procedures. But we have to comply with health department regulations. But more importantly, we need to practice sterilization and sanitation. And again, we have a zero tolerance policy for cross-contamination. Anyone engaging in that will have to be dismissed. We hate to do that because a lot of times that can happen, just accidental people getting a lot of information in their heads and not really paying attention. So pay attention on day 3 when you're doing hands-on procedures. Make sure that you're not touching anything with your contaminated gloves, and please watch out for each other. People ask me all the time, why do you teach these classes for free? Our free classes are going to be ending at the end of this year. We get by with teaching classes for free simply because we manufacture most of the permanent cosmetics that are sold today. It's really a marketing tool for Premier Pigments. I teach for free, or I teach regardless of whether there's a charge or not, simply because I love to teach. I learn from teaching. I recommend that you teach when the time is right. You can't teach someone until you have the information that is valuable to them to teach, so that you can teach others. So I don't recommend that you jump out there and start teaching people until you're prepared to do so. But I really recommend that you embrace the whole process of learning, and teaching is a part of learning. I learn so much from my students. I'm really selfish. A lot of people think that I impart all this wisdom. Well, the truth is that I learn as much from my students as y'all learn from me. It's been a really valuable tool for me in learning permanent cosmetics and perfecting my procedures, something that you might consider to color. And what I want to say about this, in this presentation about variables that affect color, the information is so very important. It really is your toolbox for doing really pretty permanent cosmetic procedures that are consistent. And again, my hope, when you take this, when you begin to understand the tools that I teach in this particular lecture, you'll be able to have control over your procedures. There are many variables that affect color. I don't spend a lot of time on manufacturing variables in this class. And the reason why I don't spend a lot of time on manufacturing variables is because you don't have a lot of control over manufacturing variables. That's my baby. I spend a lot of time over manufacturing variables. My missions, most of you know that, I didn't choose to be the pigment pioneer in permanent cosmetics. That kind of happened as a result of some horror stories that I had to overcome early on, really back in 1988. But I have spent the majority of my adult life researching permanent cosmetic pigments. In 2000, it was actually in about 2000, I had decided that I was no longer going to be a pioneer. I decided that my pioneering days for permanent cosmetic pigments were over with. I had been really doing a lot of research on longevity of colorants and that sort of thing. And then we had a product that resulted in some allergic reactions. And my pioneering days started all over again. And today I'm very, very involved in research for allergic reactions to all kinds of pigments. In fact, we released for medical treatment and financial help for anyone who has an allergic reaction to any pigment, whether it is tattoo ink or permanent cosmetic pigments. And the reason for that is that we spearhead the research into that, but also because we know these cases are very rare and there's a lot of research that needs to be done on this. And we also know the physicians who have been very successful in treating allergic reactions to pigments. So if you ever hear of an allergic reaction to tattoo ink or otherwise, please let us know. We want those cases because we want to do the research on that. But anyway, getting back to that, getting back to the manufacturing variables, there are so many variables that affect color. I spend most of my time, energy, and resources, or this company, Premier Pigments, spends most of our resources, time, and energy into the research of longevity of colorants as well as safety. Because we know there's a huge difference between one colorant and another in terms of how long it is going to hold its vibrancy in the skin. With permanent cosmetics, there are so many colorants out there that are available that just don't stay true to color for an extended period of time. There is a lot of colorants that are put into formulas that fade or result in what I term premature fading. And as a technician out in the field, I get really cranky when I have to do touch-up procedures. I don't know about y'all, but when I come into my office and I have to do a touch-up application, I get cranky. I'm in business to make money. I'm serious about business. Time is money. My time is very valuable in this business, and I get really cranky when I have to do a touch-up application. And again, my goal here today is to help you to eliminate touch-up procedures. And my goal as a pigment manufacturer is to help you eliminate touch-up procedures. I don't like doing touch-up procedures. Now, some people don't mind them as much as I do. I really don't like doing touch-up procedures. And so I've spent a lot of time studying the individual characteristics used in pigment formulas. And those characteristics include longevity of color. Again, our research, we spend a lot of time in researching longevity of color. We actually do empirical studies where we bring people in who have had their pigment applied 10 years ago, and so we take a look at that. We bring them in after 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years to see how that pigment is holding up. We know that there are colorants out there that hold true to color for 10 years or longer. And we know that there are colorants out there that only hold true to color for 6 months. And we, of course, don't like those colors and don't use them in most of our formulas. So again, pigment variables include longevity of color, tinting strength, particle size, mixing characteristics, body's absorption of specific ingredients, opacifying ability, density, and scattering ability. I can add a whole host of others based on my research as of late. But I haven't done that yet. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because that's really my baby. That's really what I embrace and the information that I understand and know so well. I could spend days talking about manufacturing variables, but I won't bore you with all of the science. What you have control over is the depth of placement of pigment placement. How deep are we going? How do we know how deep we're going? Does anybody have any clues about that? Based on what you learn. How do you know how deep you're going? Vibration. From the vibration in your stretching hand. The vibration in my stretching hand tells me everything. And that vibration in my stretching hand is so important. When I used to teach one-on-one training classes, I would have my students start the procedure with their eyes open, and the minute they got it all started, I would have them close their eyes. I would make sure, of course, that they weren't going out of line, but I would have them close their eyes and pay attention to the feel of the vibration of their stretching hand. Because, you know, we have control over our minds. And if we teach ourselves to pay attention to that vibration and we train our minds to pay attention to that vibration tells me everything. It tells me how deep I'm going. It tells me if I'm stretching properly. It tells me if I'm being consistent with the depth. It tells me if I'm putting in enough color. It tells me everything. The vibration of my stretching hand tells me everything. Okay? And you know, I want you to know that the skin, the analogy that I use is that the skin is like a rubber band. Okay? The skin has elasticity. So the skin is like a rubber band and the machine is like a sewing machine. So if I were to stretch that rubber band real tight under that sewing machine would go clean, smooth in and out of that rubber band. But if I don't stretch that rubber band very tight, that sewing machine is just going to bounce off of that upper layer of that rubber band. Okay, let's say I put that rubber band in there and I stretch it real tight, but my sewing machine doesn't have a lot of power. What's going to happen? It's just going to bounce off of that rubber band. Let's say I have the rubber band stretched real tight and I've got a real powerful sewing machine, but I've got a needle that gives just a little bit. What happens then? It's just going to bounce off of the top of that rubber band. Well, in terms of the skin and the machine and the equipment that we're using, what would happen if we were using a machine that has a needle that has some give to it? We're going to have to do a touch-up procedure. What would happen if we had a powerful machine and we didn't stretch the skin properly? We would have to do a touch-up procedure because we would likely be depositing that pigment into that epidermis as opposed to the upper dermal layer. So it's really important that we get this pigment in the upper dermal layer consistently. How many times have you seen lips that are botched? When I say botched, inconsistent color, I see that a lot. Do y'all see that? And I can tell you that it probably took me at least 150 lips before I got good at doing lips in one treatment, where I could create that pretty smooth, creamy final result color. Lips are unusual, or they're a little different than the rest of the body in that lips are mucosal tissue. Mucosal tissue accepts pigment differently than the rest of the body. So you have to understand how to work with mucosal tissue. But it starts with paying attention to the vibration of your stretching hand. Because my stretching hand tells me how deep I'm going, how consistent I am with the depth of my needle, how much I'm penetrating, if I'm stretching properly. It tells me everything. So really train your minds to pay attention to that vibration of your stretching hand. Now you can take notes if you like. What I will tell you is when I'm tattooing, I want to feel a very firm vibration when I'm doing lips. Again, when you're tattooing, you want to feel a very firm vibration when you're doing lips. You also want to feel a very firm vibration when you're doing the mucosal tissue eyeliner. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about mucosal tissue eyeliner? That lid, the wet tissue above the lower lashes. A lot of women wear color there. Okay. So anytime I'm performing a permanent cosmetic procedure on the mucosal tissue eyeliner or on lips, both of them are mucosal tissue, I need to feel a very firm vibration. I also need to feel a very firm vibration when I'm doing upper eyeliner. Upper eyeliner, I need to feel a very firm vibration. On lower eyeliner, I need to feel a medium vibration. I don't need to go as deep. On lower eyeliner, I need to feel a medium vibration. And on eyebrows, for the filled-in method, a light vibration is fine. And for those of you who are tattoo artists out there, I can tell you the face is a whole lot different than the body. So it accepts pigment differently. That's why when we have colors, when we manufacture colors for y'all, we have eyebrow colors and eyeliner colors and lip colors, because these areas on the face accept pigment so much differently than the body. Rinda Bowman used to work for me, and Rinda Bowman, she died of cancer a couple of years ago, but she managed Tears Tattoo Studio in Dallas for several years. And she's a fabulous artist. She just did a beautiful job doing large back pieces and just beautiful tattoos. And she would come into my office, and she wanted to always make sure that I was in the office. And I'm like, Rinda, you of all people who are so skilled. And she said, Sandy, this is not like body art. It's a total different canvas. And she was right. The face, all of these different procedures accept pigment differently, and it's a matter of getting to know what the difference is and how to respond to those differences. Okay? When it comes to the face, you can also write this down. When it comes to the face, the most painful part of the face is the center of the face. The Cupid's bow, near the tear duct, and near the front brows, the front of the brows. I learned how to do these procedures before we had anesthetics that worked at all. I learned to do these procedures when we weren't using anesthetics. I had a client who actually tore the head off of a stuffed animal that I gave her to squeeze during the procedure. Okay, so Emla cream was not introduced into the United States until 1993. Prior to 1993, some of the dermatologists were importing Emla cream from Europe and Canada because there wasn't anything here in the United States. And of course, since then, we have a lot better anesthetics. But back then, there just wasn't anything. Okay, so I tell you that just to tell you that I really know how to deal with pain without anesthetics. And it would behoove you to understand a little bit about that. And so that's why I say the most painful part of the face is the center of the face. I choose to get that done with first. I want to get the most painful part done and over with first. So I want to get the center of the face done first. Now, even though I want to get the center of the face done first, I never start or stop at any given point. In other words, if I'm going to do the Cupid's bow, I don't start right on the Cupid's bow. I start before the Cupid's bow and then move into it. But I essentially want to get that area done first. Okay? And the reason why I don't implant my first dot of pigment at any given point is because I don't want a big blob of pigment. It takes me a little bit of time to get my rhythm going as I'm doing a procedure. So I don't want to concentrate the color by not having my rhythm going and putting that first dot at any given point. Okay? Okay, getting back to the presentation. Other artistic and technical variables include the degree of concentration of pigment implanted. I'm going to talk to you a lot about concentrated color. Now, there's ways to concentrate color. Okay? We, in the manufacturing environment, can concentrate color by putting a high pigment load into our pigment formulations. Okay? In other words, we can increase the pigment load to create a highly concentrated formula, or decrease the pigment load if we want to create transparency. I'm also going to be talking to you a lot today about transparency and opacity. It's real important that you understand the difference between transparency and opacity and how we create that both in manufacturing environment and both through your own skills and abilities using different various shading techniques as well as colors that are intended for shading. Okay, but I'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. Tools and supplies, machines and needles are also going to create variables in color. There are needles that are intended to create transparency and needles that are intended to create opacity. I'm going to go over that as well. And then of course your artistic technique, there are many variables that affect color in terms of your artistic techniques. And I'll talk about all of those too. This is really kind of a broad overview of what this presentation is all about. Concentration of color. In the manufacturing environment, we created premier concentrated colors, our concentrated originals, simply because we know when it comes to cosmetics, not like body art again, cosmetics, we want highly concentrated color. We have a lot of body artists that purchase our pigments because it's highly concentrated. Well, the reason why we want it highly concentrated is because we know even women who want really natural color want really opaque color. If they tell me they want a really natural lip color, they still want a lot of color. They may not want vibrant color, but they want a lot of coverage. They don't want it to look like skin necessarily. They want it to look like solid color. Okay? So when it comes to cosmetics, most people want pretty opaque color. And I find as a cosmetic tattooist that if I am able to work with highly concentrated colors or colors that have a high opacity, then I can fine-tune them real easily. I can create shading with those colors very easily by adding dispersions and by working with various types of needles and techniques. So I like to start with concentrated colors because, again, concentrated colors give me opacity. It is important that you understand the difference between transparency and opacity. Transparency is like looking through glass. You can see through it. Opacity is like trying to look through a wall. It's difficult to see through. In this slide, you can see clear over on your left, you'll see where it says transparent. That is a little tiny piece of skin that we blew up for the purpose of this slide, okay? But it has no pigment in it. Now, as a pigment manufacturer, I know that the one next to it, just right to the right of it, has about a 5 to a 10% pigment load. The next one has about a 25 to 35% pigment load. And the highly opaque color is a 65% pigment load. 65% pigment load is about the highest content of pigment that you can pack into any kind of formulation in the manufacturing environment. When we came out with our concentrated colors, we're kind of the one that everybody copies. It's like they wait for us to do something and then they copy it, okay? We had a competitor when I came out with concentrated colors that the very next week they came out with this marketing that said they had a 95% pigment load. And I just had to laugh because, number one, there's no such a thing. Number two, you have to buy really expensive mills to create that, and I know they didn't do that. And, you know, it's just, it's kind of comical when you know what's really going on. But anyway, the point is that about a 65% pigment load is about the highest pigment content you can get in any formulation. And that there are, when it comes to transparency and opacity, there are procedures that we want to achieve transparency and some that we want to achieve opacity, and varying degrees in between. If I'm doing a camouflage procedure, I'm likely going to want to work with colors that are more transparent. Now, if I'm doing a camouflage procedure on an African American, I'm going to want to achieve more opacity in my final result than if I were doing a camouflage procedure on a light-skinned Caucasian. Okay? Because if you understand skin and colors, you understand that light Caucasians naturally don't have the opacity in their color, in their skin, that darker skin types do. So the darker the skin type, the more opacity I want in my colors. So in the manufacturing environment, we've tried to help y'all out and make procedures really simple for you. And we do that by concentrating our flesh colors more for the darker skin types and creating more transparency with lighter skin tones. Okay. We always have a challenge when we're dealing with titanium dioxide because it is really an opaque, it's a very opaque color, and it's found in a lot of white colors. So it's a challenge when we are formulating those flesh colors with that particular product because it as a pigment, it has natural tendencies to be very opaque. So that's just one of the many challenges with the pigment manufacturing. But this is important for you to understand when, in terms of any type of tattoo procedures. If I'm doing eye shading, I'm going to want to use something that is more of a medium transparency, certainly not a highly opaque color. If I'm doing blush, I'm going to want to go clear over onto the side of the transparent colors, more like a 5% pigment load. If I'm doing mucosal tissue eyeliner, I absolutely have to have high opacity in my color, or I'm going to have to do a lot of touch-up applications. If I'm doing lip procedures, regardless of how vibrant or natural my client wants her color, she wants highly opaque color. Okay. So, and you as a technician, understanding this and understanding how to work with dispersions and shader bars, shading needles, and shading techniques can have control over how much opacity or how much transparency you get. And we'll talk about that. In this particular slide, you notice that there's this area, this quarter section, that is lighter than this area over here. How that happened is for the purpose of showing you what happens when you add dispersions to color. I added 2 drops of dispersion to 8 drops of concentrated color and tattooed this little section here on her. In other words, this color is the same as this color over here. Again, this color here is the same color as this color here. The only difference is this, the only difference is this color, right, dispersion. 2 drops of dispersion to 8 drops of concentrated color, whereas this is the concentrated color. Does that make sense? Okay? So in other words, you can achieve more transparency by adding dispersions to your color, as in that. Okay? Of course, I had to do a touch-up procedure. When I did this procedure, I wasn't expecting it to be quite that much difference because it was only 2 drops in 2 drops of dispersion in 8 drops of concentrated color. So I wasn't expecting it to be that light. So when she came back and said, you know, it's really strange, this whole side is really light. And I said, oh, well, nothing but a thing, we'll just do a touch-up procedure. So I kind of got caught off guard there, but it really depicts what happens when you add dispersion to color. Same way with this particular case here. Now this is body art, but you see this is about a 35% pigment load, okay? And the artist just went in with a shading technique in this area here with the 35%, and then probably dipped into the water that they were using, or alcohol, some type of dispersant and or dilutant and just did a shading technique over here with a diluted formula. In body art, we call this a wash. Okay, so you see this color is the same here as it is in this area here. Same exact color, this just has a lot more dilutant in it. So this has added dispersion, this area here. This is not a high content, a high pigment load formula. Yes?
When you say dispersion, I mean, there are different types?
There's different types of dispersions. Okay, let's go ahead and write those down. That's a good question. Thank you for the question. The most common types of dispersions used in cosmetic and tattoo formulations are water, distilled water, alcohol, glycerin, propylene glycol, Listerine, and witch hazel. Those are the most common dilutants used in, or diluents, or dispersions, whatever terminology you want to describe those liquids used in cosmetic formulas. Okay? Yes?
I have a question. Under alcohol, would that be denatured alcohol, isopropyl alcohol?
Isopropyl alcohol.
Isopropyl.
Okay. She was asking, her question was, is it isopropyl alcohol that I was referring to as the dilutant in, or a dispersion used in cosmetic formulas? It's isopropyl alcohol. Okay, so in creating this wash, my guess is this was just distilled water or alcohol. Okay, knowing what I know about dispersions. Okay, in this particular case, which is very appropriate for this particular tattoo, you see this area here is shaded, and this is what we call shading. And the artist used a shader bar and a shading technique as opposed to dispersions. And you can create that again through different techniques and different needles. Okay? The most common shader bars that we use today in tattooing, you can write these down. The most common shader bars used in tattoo procedures include a number 4 and 6 flat shader bar, a number 8 round liner bar, and a number 14 round. Also, all magnum, M-A-G-N-U-M, all magnum bars. Those are the most common shader bars. Again, the most common shader bars are 4, 6 flat needles, 8 round, 14 round, and all magnum bars. The most common liner bars used in cosmetic tattoo procedures are a single needle, a number 3 needle, and a number 5 needle. The most common needles used in cosmetic tattoo procedures include a number 1 needle, a number 3 round needle, and a number 5 round needle. The difference between a shader bar and a liner bar is just that there is space between the needles with a shader bar. The difference between a liner bar and a shader bar is that The difference between a liner bar and a shader bar is that shader bars have space between the needles. Liner bars are soldered very tightly together. Again, the difference between a liner bar and a shader bar is that there are space between the needles when using shader bars. Okay? Liner bars are soldered very tightly together. The more tight they're soldered together, the more opacity they create in the final result. Liner bars are intended to create opacity in the final result. Shader bars are intended to create medium to light transparency in the final result. Okay. The difference between liner bars and shader bars is that shader bars have space between the needles. Liner bars are soldered very tightly together. Liner bars are intended to create opacity. Shader bars are intended to create more transparent colors in the final result.
Are those also including the needles? These are just tattoo, or are these also the needles that we work with?
Both tattooing and cosmetic tattooing.
It's all the same.
Yes, all the same. Absolutely. Okay. I want to explain to you how needles are made, and the reason why I want to explain to you how needles are made is simply because it helps to understand what's going on in your procedure if you understand needles. Okay? First and foremost, 1 out of every 4 needles is a garbage needle. Okay? 1 out of every 4 needles is an ineffective needle or a barb needle or whatever. It's ineffective, okay? Again, 1 out of every 4 needles is an ineffective needle. It may be barbed, it may be dull, it may just not work. I can say that because I've talked to a lot of needle manufacturers and they agree. No matter how much quality control we have in the manufacturing environment, 1 out of every 4 needles is an ineffective needle. And the reason that's important for you to understand is so you don't have these expectations that every time you whip out a needle that your procedure is going to go just really smoothly, because that isn't what happens. Okay? My work changed when I finally understood that. Because what happened is instead of pushing the procedure to the point that I couldn't, in other words, when I started tattooing, and if that pigment doesn't fly in the skin, the first thing I do is I switch out my needle. Okay? If I'm tattooing and that needle is not depositing pigment quickly, the first thing I do is I switch out my needle. Now you might say to yourself, oh my goodness, these needles are expensive. They are. Can we take them back? No, we can't. But it's really all about expectations, okay? Get over it. Charge your client a little bit more. The point is that I don't want to frustrate myself and create more pain and longer procedure time by using an ineffective needle.